Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to be moving on in our math, and we are going to be moving from equivalent fractions, where we were looking at fractions that are equal to each other, and now we are going to be comparing fractions. We're going to be seeing if fractions are greater than, less than, or equal to each other. So if you take a look at this cover page here, we see two different pies. Both were divided into fourths. So that means that the denominators were the same. So here you can see that there are 2/4, and here you can see that there is 1/4. Okay, so we know that 2 is greater than 1. So when fractions have the same denominator, it's actually the easiest way to compare them. So that is what we'll be looking at first today, comparing fractions with like denominators or the same denominator. But first I wanted to review with you a little bit. There are a couple different ways that you can compare fractions. If you look here, we can not compare fractions, but represent fractions. If you look here, we can represent fractions in a few different ways. We can represent them with shapes, like this circle here. We can represent them with number lines, like this number line here, or with fraction bars, which we've seen. If you look here, all three of these examples are representing fourths. Okay, the circle is 4/4, the number line goes up to 4/4 or 1/2, and then at the bottom you can see the fraction bar is also 4/4. Now, it is very important to know that when you are comparing fractions, you have to compare fractions of shapes that are the same size. If you take a look here, and we've seen word problems that discuss this a little bit, even though this fraction on the left is representing 1/4, and this fraction is representing 3/4, the 1/4 is bigger than the 3/4 because we're not comparing shapes of the same size. So this cannot be represented as comparing fractions. You just can't compare these two. They have to be shapes of the same size. Now, very quickly, before we begin again, we have to remember that there are different fractions equal to 1/2. This will help us down the line, okay? Remember that when you're discussing 1/2, you can think of doubles. You can think of your 2 times tables, okay? For example, we have 1/2, 1 out of 2. 1 and 1 is 2. Since 1 is half of 2, 1 out of 2 is 1/2. The same can be said for 2/4. 2 is half of 4. 2 and 2 make 4, or 2 times 2 makes 4. So 2 is half of 4, so that's equal to 1/2 as well. 3/6. Since 3 times 2 equals 6, or 3 is half of 6, or 3 plus 3 equals 6, 3/6 is 1/2, 4/8, 5/10, and 6/12, and it continues on in that pattern. Okay, we have also learned, and this is a review, that we can order our unit fractions. We can put them in order. A unit fraction represents one part of a whole. So whenever the numerator is 1, you can compare those unit fractions. Ordering unit fractions isn't easy because the numerator is always 1. So the numerators will be the same. So as the digit in the denominator becomes bigger, as you are dividing the shape into more parts, the fraction is actually becoming smaller. So if we look here, okay, we begin with 1 out of 1, or 1/2. That's really our first unit fraction, 1/2, 1 out of 1. As you look down the line, we go 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and 1/6. As that denominator increases from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, the fraction becomes smaller. You can see that it is a shorter space. So 1/2 is here. So 1/3, the denominator is getting bigger. That means it's being divided into more parts. So 1/3 is smaller, and 1/4 is even smaller. and 1/5 and 1/6 are even smaller. And we'll come back to that again. These are things that you're going to need to identify when you're comparing fractions. If the both numerators are 1, then you can compare the fractions by looking at the denominator, and the bigger denominator will actually be smaller, as you can see here. This is an overview. We also discussed this, so it is a bit of a review, and it will not be what you'll be seeing today, but this is what you will be seeing today. When we're comparing fractions with like denominators, okay, we're going to recall a numerator is the top number and a denominator is the bottom number. Remember, N for north and D for down. When we're comparing two fractions with the same denominator, okay, this is the easiest example, the easiest way to compare fractions. When the denominators are the same, it's the easiest to do because you're just comparing the numerators, and the smaller the numerator, the smaller the fraction. So when we're comparing two fractions, we are comparing objects that have the same total. So here you can see both these fractions being represented are fourths. We have 1/4 and we have 3/4. You can see 1/4 is smaller than 3/4. So by the way, these symbols are right along the second to bottom line on your keyboard, right next to the question mark. Okay, there's a period and a comma, and if you hold shift, you can get the two symbols for less than and greater than. So I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to remember the opening of the symbol always faces the bigger number. 3/4 is bigger, so this fraction would read 1/4 is less than 3/4. Okay, we'll come back to this another time because that is not for today's lesson. Okay, so here we're going to practice a couple of fractions with like denominators. Sometimes you will be given picture models, number lines, or fraction bars, and sometimes you will not be given those things. So you have to remember the rule that when the denominators are the same, this is the big takeaway from today. When the denominators are the same, the smaller numerator is smaller. Very straightforward when you're comparing the same denominators. So here you can see, okay, 2/5 and 4/5. 2 is smaller than 4, so 2/5 is less than 4/5. All right, moving on here, we see 2/8 and we see 5/8. Again, we're comparing fractions with the same denominator, eighths. That's the first thing you should look for. Are the denominators the same? In this case, they are. So 2/8 is, again, less than 5/8. 2 is smaller than 5. So very straightforward. 2 is less than 5. So 2/8 is less than 5/8. Okay, we'll try a couple more examples. This time you need to identify the fraction first. Well, or we need to identify the fraction first. So here we see 1/3. And we see 2/3. Okay, the denominators, don't worry about these lines. The denominators are the same, 3 and 3, both thirds. So 1/3 is less than 2/3. Here, okay, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're dividing into fifths. So we have 2/5, 2/5, and we have 4/5. Okay, and we can see that, okay, 2, since they're fifths, both fifths, we can compare the numerators, 2 and 4. 2 is less than 4, so 2/5 is less than 4/5. Down here, 1. So when I'm looking at a shape like this where, okay, there's a lot of parts, you can look at the line going across, okay? and 1, 2, 3, 4 on top. So that means you can see 4 on the bottom. So 4 and 4 is 8. So this here is 3/8. This fraction here is also divided into eighths. If I count around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/8. Okay, and you can see again, 3/8 is less than 6/8. And our final fraction for today, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're dividing into sixths. Our fractions are both sixths. This one here is 4/6, and this one here is only 1/6. So in this case, 4/6 is greater than 1/6. Okay, so that's all the examples I'm going to give you today. So these pages will be practiced later in the week because they mix up all the lessons. So tomorrow we'll be looking at fractions with the same numerator. It's a little bit trickier. It's a little less straightforward, but still not that challenging, not too bad. So again, today we're looking at fractions with the same denominators or like denominators. That is how it is stated. And we will be working on the practice buddy for today. And that will be your assignment. It's pretty straightforward, not too tricky. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed the lesson, and I will see you next time.